The man's son looked at her the way certain people look at someone who has done something they cannot categorize. Not with gratitude, not with contempt, with the specific measured courtesy of someone performing appreciation at a volume that communicates its own ceiling. He was standing in the waiting room of Emory University Hospital's cardiac care floor at 2:17 in the morning. He had driven 40 minutes from Buckhead, and he was still in the clothes he had worn to whatever he had been doing before the hospital called, which was clearly something that required a jacket that had not come off a rack. He looked at Diane Greer, the Linwood Residence's security badge still clipped at her jacket lapel, her coffee thermos on the chair beside her, 9 years of night shifts in the particular stillness of her posture, and he said the following thing. I want you to know we'll make sure you're reimbursed. For whatever you spent.
You paid a hospital
Diane looked at
for a man
him.
you didn't know. That's
she did not
kind.
look at the
you
floor.
Don't need to be modest with me.
I'm not looking
we'll make sure
for reimbursement.
I'm not looking
she
for
said.
reimbursement.
He
Call
almost
Vanessa in the morning. She'll
smiled.
handle it.
The smile of a man who has been in enough rooms to recognize a performance of selflessness and who considers himself equipped to see through it. You paid a hospital deposit. For a man you didn't know. That's very kind. But you don't need to be modest with me. I'm not being modest, she said. I'm being accurate. He looked at her for a moment, the way people look at things that have not behaved as expected. Then he placed a business card on the chair beside her thermos. Preston Marsh. Chief Operating Officer. Marsh Capital Properties. Call that number in the morning, he said. Ask for my assistant, Vanessa. She'll take care of it. He moved toward the corridor where his father's attending physician was waiting. Diane looked at the card. She picked it up. She put it in the breast pocket of her jacket. Then she went back to her chair. She had another 3 hours before her shift technically ended. She had nowhere to be except here. She stayed until 6:15 in the morning, when the attending confirmed that Elwood Marsh was stable and sleeping and would remain that way through the day. Then she drove home to her apartment in East Atlanta, made coffee she did not drink, sat at her kitchen table for 22 minutes, and did not call the number on the business card. She would not call it that day or any day after. Before you go any further, pause right here and drop your city in the comments. Where are you watching this from? Atlanta, London, Lagos, Los Angeles. Wherever this finds you, we want to know. Because this story is everywhere. Now, back to Diane. Diane Greer had been saving since she was 26 years old. Not abstractly, not aspirationally, not in the vague way that people tell themselves they are saving while the money finds other places to go. She had been saving with the specific, unromantic discipline of someone who knows exactly what the target is and has done the math on how long it will take at the rate they can manage. The target was 1412, Delaney Street, East Atlanta. A 3-bedroom craftsman house on a quiet street that still had most of its trees. A porch wide enough for 2 rocking chairs. A front garden that, in the summer of 1987, had held the most productive tomato plants in the neighborhood, according to the woman who grew them, who was not a person given to exaggeration, and who had the ribbons from 2 consecutive East Atlanta neighborhood beautification competitions to support the claim. That woman was Noir Greer, Diane's grandmother. Nora had lived at 1412 Delaney for 31 years. She had moved into it in 1980 with Diane's grandfather, Robert, who died of a heart attack in 1994 and left Nora the house, a 1991 Ford pickup with transmission trouble, and the abiding conviction, which he had communicated clearly in 42 years of marriage, that what you owned outright could not be taken from you. Nora had held on to that conviction the way she held on to everything Robert had given her. Carefully. Completely. Without letting the world make her apologize for it. Diane's mother, Renee, had grown up in that house. Diane had spent every summer of her childhood in it, the 3rd bedroom with the slanted ceiling, the garden where Nora taught her to stake tomatoes and where she had, at 9 years old, stepped on a bee and screamed loud enough to send the neighbor's dog into a frenzy. She knew every sound the house made. The specific creak of the 4th step on the porch stairs. The way the kitchen screen door caught if you didn't lift it slightly when you pulled. The smell of the hallway in June. Old wood and gardenias from the pot Nora kept on the porch railing. In 2009, Nora had a stroke. She recovered mostly, but the medical bills ran past what Medicare covered. In 2010, she had a second one. The bills from the second one took what was left. By the spring of 2011, there was one asset remaining that could handle the debt. She had signed the quitclaim deed on a Thursday afternoon in March of 2011, in the offices of a real estate attorney on Moreland Avenue, with Diane beside her and a pen Diane did not want to hand her. Nora had signed it with the steadiness of someone who had made a decision before they sat down and was simply completing the paperwork. Then she had folded her copy of the deed, put it in her purse and said, "Come on. I want soup." They had gone to a diner on Memorial Drive and Nora had eaten chicken soup and not talked about what had just happened, and Diane had sat across from her and understood, without being told, that this was the model. You did what the situation required. You ate your soup. You kept going. Nora died in January of 2015, in a care facility in Decatur, in a room that was clean and adequate and nothing like the house on Delaney Street. Diane had been with her. She had held her hand through the last hours of that Thursday night, and when it was over she had sat for a long time in the chair beside the bed and looked at the window and thought about the fourth step on the porch stairs. She had been 26 years old. She had started the savings account the following month. February 2015. East Atlanta Community Credit Union. A dedicated account she named, in the account management system, Future Fund. She put $200 in it on the day she opened it. She had been putting money in it every month since, in amounts that varied with overtime in good months and tight ones, and had never once moved money out of it for any reason because the rule she had established for herself was the same rule Nora had applied to everything that mattered. You decided what it was for before you started, and then you did not decide again. By November, the account held $22,460. 1412. Delaney Street had passed through 2 real estate transactions since Nora's sale in 2011. The second buyer, a holding company called Marsh Capital Properties, had acquired it in a package deal in 2016 as part of a larger East Atlanta portfolio purchase. The house had been vacant since 2017. Every 2 months Diane ran the address through the county property search and the real estate listing aggregators. It had never come back to market. She did not know why. She checked anyway. The Linwood Residences was a 32-story luxury apartment building on Peachtree Road, northeast Atlanta. It had a ground-floor lobby with marble that was not the cheap kind, a parking garage with 3 levels and attendant-monitored entry, a resident concierge service, a gym, a rooftop terrace that Diane had been on exactly twice in 9 years, and a waiting list for 2-bedroom units that was, according to the building manager, currently 14 months long. Diane had started working nights there when she was 29. She had taken the position because it paid $4 an hour more than the day shift and because the overtime was reliable and because at night, in the hours between 1 and 4 when the building was as quiet as a building with 216 residents could ever be, she could read. She had read extensively about real estate law, property deed research, easement rights, and the specific procedural requirements for quiet title actions in the state of Georgia. Not because anyone had asked her to, but because the Delaney Street situation had specific complications in its title history that she had spent 4 years researching on her own time. She knew the building's rhythms exactly. Which residents kept unusual hours. Which ones had standing late-night deliveries. Which of the parking garage cameras had the wider angle. Where the dead zones were and where they weren't. Level B of the parking garage had a dead zone in the northeast corner, between elevator B and the reserved spots for residents in units 2200 through 2250. The camera covering that area had been submitted for maintenance replacement in September. It was still in the queue. On the night of Tuesday, November 8th, at 11:43 in the evening, Diane was doing her level B sweep when she heard it. Not a crash. Not a scream. A soft, specific sound, the compressed exhalation of a body going against something hard, followed by a heavier contact. The sound of someone falling. She moved toward elevator B. He was on the concrete floor beside the rear wheel of a dark gray sedan in space 2248. An elderly man, slight, in a cardigan over a dress shirt. He had been on his way from the car to the elevator. The car door was still open. His phone had skated under the adjacent vehicle. He was on his side, one arm under him, eyes open, working hard for breath in the specific way of someone whose heart is doing something it should not be doing. She was on the ground beside him before she had consciously decided to go there. "Sir, can you hear me?" She put 2 fingers to his neck. Pulse. Rapid. Irregular. Weak. She looked at his face. Gray beneath the fluorescent light. His lips were pale. His hand found her arm, and his grip was the grip of someone holding on to the one thing that was not moving. "It's all right," she said. "I've got you. My name is Diane. You're not alone. Can you tell me your name?" L. He could not get past the first syllable. His hand tightened on her arm. "Okay. Okay." She had her radio in one hand and her phone in the other. She called 911 and spoke clearly, all the information. Level B northeast corner, adult male, cardiac presentation, approximate age mid-80s. She'd stay on the line. Then she spoke to him. Not the words from the training, the actual words, the ones that came from sitting in a care facility in Decatur in 2015 holding someone's hand and knowing that the sound of a voice was the most functional thing a body in crisis could receive. She talked to him about the weather, about the drive to the hospital being 12 minutes at this hour, about nothing specific and everything necessary. She kept her hand over his. The paramedics arrived in 9 minutes. She rode in the ambulance. She had not been asked to. She had gotten in and no one told her to get out, and so she stayed, holding the handrail, watching them work, and when one of the paramedics said, "You family," she said, "No, I work the building," and the paramedic looked at her for a moment and then went back to work. At Emory, the admissions desk flagged the Medicare account immediately. The coverage had lapsed. A renewal cycle missed, the kind of administrative oversight that happens when the person managing an elderly parent's paperwork is managing too many things, and the one that fails is the one nobody checks until it matters. The cardiac unit had a clear policy, and it applied uniformly. A $7,500 deposit before the procedure began. His condition did not allow for the 2 to 3 hours a Medicare reinstatement would require. The admissions coordinator was apologetic and exact. There was no version of this where the policy bent. Diane looked at the desk. She looked at the corridor where they were preparing a room. She reached into her jacket pocket. She took out her debit card. She set it on the desk. "Run it," she said. The coordinator looked at the card. She looked at Diane. "Ma'am, that's a significant." "Run it," Diane said. The coordinator ran it. $7,500. $14,960 remaining. Diane sat in the waiting room with her thermos and her security badge and her phone face down in her lap. She did not call anyone. There was no one to call who would have changed anything. She sat with the specific contained stillness of someone who has done something irreversible and has decided not to perform complexity about it. At 2:17, Preston Marsh came through the main entrance. He had his father's height without his father's stillness. He moved through the lobby with the forward lean of a man whose professional life involved being the one who arrived and took charge. He was 55, clean-cut, in the cashmere jacket that had come off no rack. He scanned the waiting room, found Diane, walked over, and delivered the business card and the speech. Diane put the card in her pocket. She said what she said. He went to speak to the attending. She drove home at 6:15. She made the coffee. She sat at the table for 22 minutes. She did not look at the business card again for 11 days. On the 12th day, her phone rang with a number she did not recognize. She answered. "Is this Diane Greer?" "Yes. This is Elwood Marsh. I believe you helped me recently." His voice was deliberate and dry, the voice of someone who has learned over 84 years to use fewer words than the situation invites and to mean all of them. "I'm glad you're doing better," she said. "Preston told me what you did. The deposit." She waited. "I'd like to meet you," he said. "If you're willing. I'm at the building most Tuesdays. I own the majority stake in it." She was quiet for a moment. "I know," she said. She did not tell him what else she knew. They met on a Tuesday afternoon in the Linwood Residence's ground floor meeting room. a corporate space she had unlocked for catering deliveries and maintenance vendors and, on 2 occasions, for building management depositions, but never for anything like this. He arrived with a cane she had not expected and a handshake that said he had not either. He was slight in the way of men who had once been larger and had been returning to their original dimensions for the past decade. His eyes were still sharp. He looked at her with the attention of someone who had been told a thing and wanted to measure it against the person in front of him. They sat. He said, "I want to understand what happened. From your perspective." She told him. Plainly, in order, without editorializing. The sweep, the sound, the garage floor, the ambulance, the admissions desk. She said it all the way you report what happened when you are talking to someone who deserves the factual version. "Why did you do it?" he asked. "The deposit." She looked at him. "Because the alternative was leaving. You didn't know me." "No," she said. "That's not what decided it." He was quiet for a moment. He turned his cane once in his hand, a small rotation, a thinking motion. "Preston said you told him you weren't looking for reimbursement." "I'm not." "What are you looking for?" She paused. Not because she hadn't thought about the answer. Because she hadn't expected to be asked. She said, "Nothing from you. I've been saving for a house. For 12 years. That's what I'm looking for. But that's separate from this." "A house where?" She looked at him. "East Atlanta," she said. "Delaney Street." He was very still. 1412, she said. "It was my grandmother's house. She sold it in 2011. It's been in your portfolio since 2016. I check the listings every 2 months." He did not respond immediately. He held the cane in both hands. He looked at the table between them. "What was your grandmother's name?" he said. "Noir Greer." He said nothing. "She died in 2015, Diane said. She never went back." Elwood Marsh sat at the table in the meeting room of a building he had built and looked at the woman who had put $7,500 on a hospital counter for a stranger, and he said nothing for a long time. Then he said, "Thank you for coming." He stood with his cane. He shook her hand. He left. She sat in the empty meeting room for a few minutes after he went. She did not know what to make of the conversation. She went upstairs and began her shift. She did not hear from him for 3 weeks. In those 3 weeks, she worked 11 night shifts and 2 overtime days. She transferred $900 to the future fund account. She ran the Delaney Street address through the property search on a Tuesday and found nothing new. She ate dinner with her mother twice and said nothing about any of this, because there was nothing definitive to say and because Renee had spent her own years carrying the weight of Delaney Street and did not need to carry speculation. What she did not know was what Elwood Marsh did in those 3 weeks. He pulled the full title history on 1412, Delaney Street the morning after their meeting. He had an attorney who had been doing this for him for 27 years and who could produce a complete chain of title on any property in the Marsh portfolio within 48 hours. The chain came back. The 2011 quitclaim deed was there. Grantor, Nora Grace Greer. Trustee, Robert L. Greer Estate. Consideration, the forgiveness of a medical debt in the amount of $41,380. Grantee, a medical receivables company. He read it twice. He had purchased the property in 2016 as part of a 17-property East Atlanta acquisition. He had not known the history of each property. You did not know the history of each property when you were buying 17 at once. You bought the package, you held the assets, you reassessed as the market moved. 1412 Delaney had sat vacant since the last tenant vacated in 2017. It had been earmarked for renovation and resale in the next capital cycle. That cycle had not yet begun. He sat with the title document for 3 days. On the 4th day, he called his attorney and told him what he wanted to do. His attorney asked him to confirm it. He confirmed it. The attorney said it would take approximately 2 weeks to prepare the documentation correctly. 2 weeks and 3 days later, His attorney called Diane. She had been asleep. She worked nights. She answered because she answered numbers she did not recognize. The attorney said, "Mr. Marsh would like you to come to his office on Thursday. He has something for you." She said, "About the deposit." "Not about the deposit," the attorney said. "He asked me to tell you that specifically. Not about the deposit." She lay in the dark after the call and looked at the ceiling and thought about Noir signing a deed on a Thursday afternoon and then saying, "Come on, I want soup." She went on Thursday. Preston Marsh was there. He was standing near the window of his father's office on the 42nd floor of a building in Midtown, whose glass reflected the Atlanta skyline in both directions. He looked at her when she came in with the expression of a man who has been told something he did not expect and has had 2 weeks to prepare a posture for it. She looked at him once and looked at his father. Elwood Marsh was behind the desk. He had the cane. He had a folder in front of him, which he slid across the desk toward her when she sat down. She opened it. A warranty deed. 1412, Delaney Street, East Atlanta, Georgia. Grantor, Marsh Capital Properties LLC. Grantee, Diane Greer. She looked at the page. She read it again the way you read something when your brain has received it correctly and is checking the reception. She looked at Elwood Marsh. "The property taxes are current through the end of next year," he said. "There are some deferred maintenance items I've had the property manager document. Nothing structural. The plumbing is sound and the roof is 4 years old." He paused. "I had the garden cleared last week. The soil's still good." She did not say anything. "I should have known the history of that property," he said. "I should have known it before I bought it. And I didn't. That matters." "You didn't know," she said. "Ignorance and innocence are not the same thing," he said. He said it the way he said everything. Deliberate, dry, exactly the number of words required. "I've been in real estate for 60 years. When you buy a property, you buy its history. I didn't do the work to know what I was buying. I've been thinking about that." Preston was still by the window. He said, "The 7500. It's in your account. It went back 2 days after the meeting." He said it to the window, not to Diane. Diane looked at the deed. "I want to be clear about something," she said. She looked at Elwood. "I didn't pay the deposit so that you would do this." "I know," he said. "I paid it because there was nobody else there." "I know that too," he said. "That's why I'm doing this." She looked at the deed in her hands. The address printed in the legal type of a formal document. 1412, Delaney Street. She had said that address to herself so many times across 12 years that it had lost its separateness. It had become part of her internal speech the way certain numbers do when they are the target of something you have held long enough. And now it was on a piece of paper in her hands with her name on it. She set the deed on the desk very carefully and looked out the window Preston was standing near. Midtown Atlanta from the 42nd floor. The city that had contained all of this, the Tuesday night, the garage floor, the admissions desk, the business card in her pocket, 12 years of night shifts, a mason jar of savings that had gone by another name, a woman who signed a deed on a Thursday and said, "Come on, I want soup." She picked the deed back up. She said, "Thank you." She did not look at Preston. She looked at Elwood. He nodded once. She left. She drove to Delaney Street directly from his office, still in the clothes she had worn to the meeting, the deed on the passenger seat in its folder. She drove the route she had learned at 9 years old, the route her mother had driven every Friday evening of her childhood, the specific turn onto Delaney from the cross street where the dry cleaner used to be and now wasn't. The trees were still there. Most of them. She parked in front. The house was a Craftsman from 1947, 3 bedrooms, a covered porch, white exterior that needed painting, dark green shutters, a garden in front that had been cleared of the years of growth and stood now in the specific stripped-back readiness of ground that has been prepared. The porch railing still had the iron hook where Noir had hung the pot of gardenias every spring. The hook was there. The pot was gone. She got out of the car. She walked to the porch steps. The fourth step. She pressed it with her foot. It creaked exactly the same way. She stood there for a moment in front of the door with the deed folder under her arm. Then she sat down on the fourth step and she put her hands on her knees and she looked at the cleared front garden and she pressed her lips together and let 12 years of something she had been holding very carefully go. She did not sob. She did not perform anything. She sat on the fourth step of the porch at 1412 Delaney Street and cried in the specific quiet way of someone completing an accounting that has been running for a very long time. 3 minutes, maybe 4. Then she wiped her face with both hands. She stood up. She put the key the attorney had given her in the lock and opened the door. The house smelled like old wood and settled air and the particular absence of people that collects in an unoccupied space over years. She walked through it. The hallway. The kitchen. The third bedroom with the slanted ceiling. The back door to the garden. She stood at the kitchen window for a while and looked at the backyard where the tomato beds had been. She did not stay long. She had a shift in 4 hours. She went back to the car and opened the glove compartment and took out the photograph she had kept there since 2015. Her grandmother on the front porch of this house. 1969. Yellow dress, hands on the railing, looking at the camera with the expression of someone who has just been told to smile and has decided to smile but on their own terms. The house behind her, white, green shutters, the hook already on the railing, a pot of gardenias already there. She looked at the photograph and then at the house. Same hook. Same porch. Same fourth step. She put the photograph back in the glove compartment. She drove to work. The things that followed moved at the pace appropriate to each of them. The deposit reimbursement had arrived, as Preston said, 2 days after the meeting. $7,500 back to the future fund account, no message attached. She had seen it and said nothing to anyone. The deed was recorded at the Fulton County Courthouse in the second week of December. It was a matter of public record. Diane Greer, owner. 1412 Delaney Street. Her mother came with her on a Saturday in January to see it for the first time since the sale. Renee stood in the kitchen for a long time without speaking. Then she said, the curtain rod in the third bedroom was always crooked. Then she sat down on the kitchen floor and cried for 11 minutes while Diane sat beside her. Then they both stood up. Renee said she was going to make coffee if there was a coffee maker. There was. Diane had bought one the week before. They made coffee and drank it at the kitchen table and talked about which walls needed paint and which didn't. In the spring, Diane planted tomatoes in the back garden. She staked them the way Noir had showed her. She drove a stake too deep the first time and pulled it and drove another one right. The plants came up in June. She took a photograph of the first tomato and put it in her phone beside the photograph from the glove compartment. Noir on the porch in 1969. The first tomato from the back garden in the summer of the year the house came back. She sent both photographs to her mother with no caption. Her mother replied in 4 minutes. A single word. Finally. Elwood Marsh recovered fully and returned to the building's resident roster in February. He used the elevator now instead of the stairs. Diane saw him twice in the first month, once in the lobby, once near elevator B. The second time, he nodded at her. She nodded back. Neither of them said anything. There was nothing to say that had not already been said, and both of them understood this without discussing it. Preston Marsh passed her in the lobby in March. He stopped. He looked at her with a different expression than the one he had worn in the waiting room at 2:17 in the morning. Not warm. Not apologetic. Something more specific. The expression of a person who has been required to revise an assessment and has done so correctly. He said, "The house." "Yes," she said. He nodded. He walked on. The future fund account was renamed in March. She went into the credit union's account management system on a Tuesday afternoon during her break and changed the name. She called it what it was now, which was not a fund for a future thing but an accounting of a completed one. She called it what her grandmother had always called the $12 she set aside every week for the garden in the backyard at Delaney Street. Not savings, not an investment, not a fund. She called it For the Garden. The account name change cost nothing and changed nothing practical. She did it because Nora had taught her that the right name for a thing was not a minor detail. It was the whole thing. If you named it correctly from the start, you would not confuse it with something else. You would not spend it on something else. You would know exactly what you were keeping it for, and why, and whose voice had told you to keep it. She transferred $200 the same day. She had been putting $200 in at the start of every month since February 2015. She was not going to stop because the first thing was done. There was always a next thing. Drop your city in the comments if you're still here. We've been telling you this story from wherever we are, and we want to know where you've been listening from. Now. And if you've ever done something quiet for someone who couldn't repay you, something that cost you something real, leave one word in the comments that describes what made you do it. Just one word. We read all of them. Subscribe to Noir Resurgence. We come back every week with a story like this one. The kind the world almost missed. The kind that doesn't have a press release or a viral moment or a story told in someone else's interest. The kind that gets told because it's true and because the truth finds a stage when someone is willing to build one. Like this video if it stayed with you. Share it with someone who needs it. We'll see you next week.